President of the United States is, our boss. But he's also, the President and the First Lady are kind of like the mom and the dad of the country. And when your dad says something, you listen. And when you don't, it usually bites you in the ass later on.
Well, welcome back to this reality check special on gun control. Comedian Chris Rock explaining President Obama, he says, is the dad of the nation. When he calls for stricter gun control, the rest of the country should listen. Not sure who he's talking to there, but there are well over 200 county sheriffs across the country who have said they will not fall into line with any executive order from the president that violates the Second Amendment. Here's a look at that reality check. Well, there is one group of law enforcement who have been very vocal about the president's calls for tighter gun control laws, along with his 23 executive directives signed about 2 weeks ago. That group of law enforcement, county sheriffs from across the country. In fact, there are now 228 county sheriffs across the nation and a number of sheriff associations that have come out vowing to defend the Constitution. In order to do that, they say they will not enforce any federal law that violates the Second Amendment rights of the people in their counties. That list includes sheriffs from Washington, Alabama, Utah, New Mexico, Texas, Florida, California, Kentucky, Ohio, just to name a few. In fact, it is a sheriff from Kentucky who says he was the first to make this stand that seems to have rapidly spread across the nation. He is Sheriff Denny Payman from Jackson County, Kentucky, and he spoke with me by phone.
Signed a letter. I was actually the first sheriff to make the stand, and about 3 days later is when our Oregon sheriff did, and then some others followed with that. The way it's been kind of displayed is these are suggestions that we'll talk about, but then it's all of a sudden gone to, no, these are what we're going to enforce. Well, they're not going to be enforced here.
Now, we went through that list of President Obama's 23 executive orders on guns, and the reality is most of them are simply memos to federal agencies about giving instruction, which, in fairness, is exactly what an executive order is supposed to consist of. From what we can tell, the list of 23 does not really include any new laws on guns via executive order, which is what Sheriff Payman says he is looking out for.
This is my feeling,
okay,
and I believe I'm on the right track. Is what they're doing is they're trying to find a soft spot. They're trying to crack the door. Okay, well, if they'll accept that, let's chip away at that amendment a little bit. I know the people of my county well enough. I know the people that still have basically a patriotic blood that runs through them and that still stand on the Constitution. And I'm not going to disarm those people. These are the good citizens. These are the people that are trying to protect each other and themselves. And to disarm one of them is why the Second Amendment was created. But to have the federal people don't have business in here doing that. They cannot walk in and disarm people in Jackson County.
So what this means for you, for those of you in Ohio and Kentucky, 2 county sheriffs have made this commitment in Ohio, 6 in Kentucky. That includes the sheriffs of Boone, Kenton, and Claremont counties. Sheriff Payman says the reason for the pledge is simple. At the end of the day, the sheriff says it is his oath of office to protect the people of his county. And he says that happens in part by protecting the constitutional rights of the people living in his county. And that is Reality Check.
Still ahead, the battle over gun control continues to heat up. The Second Amendment explained. And why do you need to own an AR-15? Still ahead.
I know the Second Amendment. What I haven't heard is one coherent reason why any civilian in America needs an AR-15 military-style assault weapon.
That is CNN host Piers Morgan asking a question that he has asked now for several weeks. Why does anyone, regardless of the Second Amendment, need an AR-15 rifle? I want to try to answer that question in just a moment, but first a look back at a reality check that explains the origins of the Second Amendment. Over gun control is something making headlines all over the country. For the past week, Reality Check has looked at the numbers behind gun control and crime rates. But tonight, we're looking at the Second Amendment, the intention behind it, and what the founders might think about the gun debate today. This is a Reality Check you won't see anywhere else. The discussion over gun control in light of the Connecticut school shooting has been building over the past week. Among the claims made that the Second Amendment was meant for hunting at a time when people use muskets. So we begin tonight with what the Second Amendment says. Quote, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. To be clear, the militia is not regular military. They were farmers and blacksmiths who went about their daily lives. But notice that the amendment says this is for the security of a free state. According to the 1828 dictionary and other historical documents of the day, that independent state was actually seen as an independent nation. So it's important to understand that the Second Amendment was not about guaranteeing the right to a musket. It was about citizens of a sovereign state matching force with military. I talked with attorney Don Moore about this.
From a legal standpoint, and the way I was taught in law school, essentially, the purpose of that amendment was to allow us to defend our country and to defend ourselves against our country.
You see, this is where American history becomes very politically incorrect, because the Second Amendment was not drafted for hunting or just self-defense from an attacker. The Second Amendment was put in place to guarantee the rights of the individual to be equally armed as military, both foreign and domestic, in the event that the citizenry might actually at some point have to fight their own government.
Specifically, the purpose of the amendment was to have an armed society. Several examples in the 20th century where governments have perpetrated evil against its citizenry, some probably even in this century, 21st century. And it's very difficult to do that to an armed populace. To an unarmed populace, you can round them up, you can put them in ghettos, you can execute them, you can do all kinds of things when they're not armed.
So what this means for you, it's again a very controversial subject, but if we're going to have a debate about what rights are actually guaranteed under the Constitution, then we need to have an honest debate about what the founders were attempting to guarantee. The Second Amendment is about making sure the population would not be controlled, dominated, or oppressed by a government. It's not my place to attempt to tell you what the founders were thinking or what they be thinking today, but the principle of what they put in place had nothing to do with the kind of weapon they were guaranteeing. It was simply about matching force. And that is Reality Check. So to the question about why an AR-15 rifle, follow me here. The framers believed in the right of free speech, but today most people believe that speech has limitations, obscene speech or hate speech. The framers believed in the right to keep and bear arms matching military force, but today the Supreme Court has ruled that you shouldn't be able to own an RPG or a tank. By extension, Piers Morgan says, an AR-15 rifle. The framers believed in the right to trial, but many Americans now for themselves believe that President Obama and Bush are okay by accusing some people of terrorism and not entitling them to that right to trial. That's why Piers Morgan and those who share his worldview will never fully understand the Constitution, because at the time the Bill of Rights were written, hate speech existed, but the framers believed the right of the individual was greater than the collective right of society. Terrorism and murder existed, but the framers believed that the right of the individual to have evidence brought against them in court was greater than the right of the mob. Firearms and weapons at the time of the founding existed, but the framers believed that the right of the individual to be armed was greater than the right of the government to control arms. Were the framers right? Are those calling for stricter controls today right? That's not for this journalist to decide. But until we accept there is a fundamental difference in worldview, both sides of this argument will continue to bang their heads against the wall. Thanks for being with us tonight. Have a great night. We'll see you back here next week.